Okay, now we're going to get into the juicy part, the trust creation. This verbiage that we'll cover now is the verbiage that needs to be in your trust. And by the way, this is Module 5. I apologize for not introducing it. We started Module 5 once we started the banking page. Okay, after we finished our summary, we started Module 5 at banking. Okay, and we covered our banking authorization, and now we're on to the trust creation. All right, so this verbiage will cover most of both jurisdictions, private or common law trust, and public. I'll specify if there's any specific verbiage that does not go on one but goes on the other. Okay, so we'll start with our declaration. All right, the declaration is the first 2 pages of your trust should normally be the declaration. The first page to 2 pages. And what this page is basically a summary of all of the pertinent information any institution who deals with your trust needs to know. And as we get into the body of this module, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. All right. It is best to make the declaration in 1 to 2 pages and make it so that it is a separable element from the trust body in the event that you want to file it. Only the declaration is made public record. Trusts do not have to be filed to be valid. So your declaration is basically a statement that you have a trust, and it will generally say what laws your trust are governed by, where your trust was formed. It will name a trustee. It will never name the beneficiaries, but we'll get into that later. And basically, it will just let people know that you have your trust name and your EIN and all those pertinent things. It's not going to be too revealing, but again, I don't want to belabor that. We're going to go into it. Now, right here where it says trusts do not have to be filed to be valid, and that's supported by, here we're at LegalZoom, and they talk about last wills and trust, and they talk about recordation. All right, and they specifically say right here that your trust does not have to be recorded. If you have a statutory trust, recording it, you still really don't need to record it, even though it's public. Let people dig. If they want some information, let them dig into it. The only exception to that will be if you're dealing in transferring of mortgage property. Then you have to deal with county deeds, and that's going to take recordation. Okay, if you transfer any deeds over to your trust, that's going to have to be recorded, and it's going to reflect the county. So you might as well record. Your trust is going to be recorded at the county as having the ownership of that deed. So it's going to be public, and it's going to be recorded at the county. That's basically the only exception to necessarily having to file a public recording of your trust. And even that is just the bare minimum of what your trust contains, or what your trust consists of. All right. The intent of the settlor. So again, we're talking about the verbiage that must be on your trust. So the trust verbiage must show the intent of the settlor to create the trust. And we'll go over the specific verbiage, how that's worded. Conferral and acceptance of property. That must be on your trust, your indentures, or your declaration, and or it could be either or both. This is the grantor and exchanger agreement. The property must exist, however, the trustee interest in the property can be contingent. And what that means is, say for instance, you want your trustee to perform some duties for you in exchange for payment of the trust. So if you have $10,000 in your trust, you could tell your trustee, okay, I'll give you the rights to that amount of money. Only after, say, 6 months will you have over 50%. I'll give you 50%. You can have 51% at the end of 6 months once you've performed service for me. Okay, so that's what they mean by some of the interest in the property can be contingent. property must be accepted by the trustee, and that's just basically the trustee signing that he accepts the contract, basically. Okay, there must be a beneficial recipient. There should be a beneficiary, but this can be added later in the trust, and the beneficiary is not named on the declaration. So that covered what I spoke of earlier, and that you never name your beneficiaries, never on your declaration. They would be later in the body of the trust, and that's the public trust. And sometimes you don't have to name the beneficiaries. You can put certain information, pertinent information about the beneficiaries, but we'll get into that later. There must be an active trustee, and they must have duties that they perform. Okay, you cannot have a sole beneficiary and a sole trustee. And this is in the case that the grantor is the beneficiary, which she's automatically the beneficiary of a trust if it's a grantor trust. If the trust is revocable, the grantor is automatically a beneficiary. Okay, so that's why whenever there's a grantor trust, there must be more than one beneficiary. The title must be split right. Of course, you have times and dates on all of your documents. Okay, so now the above elements must be on the declaration of the trust. That's the 2 pages that introduce your trust, basically. Again, except for the beneficial party or the beneficiary. So in your indentures and your bylaws, these are the things that must be present on your indentures and bylaws. Okay, so these are commercial considerations. They don't have to be in the declaration, and this is what I'm talking about of the following. It's the following verbiage. It doesn't have to be in the declaration, but it definitely has to be in the body of your trust. Okay. So, type of trust, revocable or not. If you don't have whether your trust is revocable or not, or irrevocable, the IRS will automatically assume it's revocable. So if you're silent on revocability, they will assume that your trust is revocable. You have to have your governing law. This usually goes towards the end of the document, and this is the jurisdiction that your trust is under. You need to have your table of contents. Now this seems unimportant, but if you have a 40-page trust, you need a table of contents so that you can know where to go to for certain information by your table of contents, instead of thumbing through 40 pages trying to find specific verbiage or provisions. Your trust has to have its purpose, why it was formed, and verbiage such would be formed for beneficiaries, preservation of property, etc. Has to have who your trustee is, your primary trustee, that is your first trustee, and your successor trustees. That is trustees that will replace any trustee that moves out of the trust for whatever reason. Has to have your beneficiaries. Names of the beneficiaries should not be mentioned in any public capacity. It allows people to come after your trust. So even if you have a quote-unquote public trust, you don't need to name your beneficiaries on the declaration or any of the instruments that other parties will see. That's a private contract, and it should be treated as thus. Your trust needs to have a spendthrift clause, and this is a statement that no beneficiary can make trust assets liable to any creditor, nor shall any creditor have claim to trust property or a distribution amount by way of claim on beneficiary. And this basically stops creditors from coming after people when they find out that the people are involved or they're beneficiaries of trust. And what they like to do is they like to attack the full trust, because they can then supersede what that individual may owe and go after a larger amount because of the assets of the trust. Okay, and it's called a spendthrift clause. Trustee limited liability. Your trust must contain a statement that the trustee is not liable for obligations of the trust or loss to the trust during faithful administration, except for willful misconduct, gross negligence, or reckless action. Those seeking claim must look to the trust for compensation, allowing the trustee to sign without recourse to trustee. Okay, the statement that the trustee is not liable for obligations or debts of the trust or loss of the trust during faithful administration is to protect your trustee and give your trustee the confidence that if he makes a mistake, or if the trust just happens to be, if he makes a bad investment, or if he makes an investment and it goes bad, it's not necessarily that he makes a bad investment, then the trustee or the grantor won't turn around and try to sue him or hold him responsible for that. If the trust inquires debt for whatever reason, that trustee needs to be held harmless. Okay, so the trustee needs to know that he has a little leeway room to use his imagination or her imagination to expand the assets without worrying about being sued, basically. All right, unless for willful misconduct, gross negligence, or reckless action. You know, if he just does something crazy, then that's a different story. All right. There also needs to be a disclaimer that anyone who has an issue with the trust must seek compensation from the trust and not the trustee. This is where, I don't know if people have seen without recourse to trustee, but this is why trustees can sign that. They sign that because this is reinforced somewhere within the trust document that the trust is to be looked at for any claims or compensation, not the trustee. So when a trustee does a deal, does any type of transaction with any entity, he or she then signs without recourse to trustee, and that puts whoever receives that signature on that contract, that puts them on notice that, listen, if anything goes wrong with this deal, you don't look to me, the trustee, for compensation, for claim, you look to the trust.